Thomas Hart asks, other than the US, which country's political history do you find the most interesting? I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I haven't studied too much of the political history of other countries, really, or at least nitty-gritty detail stuff. Like, I can give you more intricate or intimate details of American political history than I can of the history of other countries. I mean, the UK is interesting, but that's largely because it also gives more context to the American political system, which, of course, it's a derivative of. I'll have to get back to you guys on that. E.R. Sandrune or Lars Sandrune asks, most important battle in world history? The Battle of Ain Anjalut. It was between Egyptians and the Mongols. It prevented a Mongol invasion of Egypt and North Africa, which could have radically altered history, so it's probably one of the most important battles in history that you've probably never heard of. Knight de Grey asks, what's your opinion on Romanticism? Well, I guess it depends on what kind of Romanticism you're thinking of. If you're thinking of Romanticism as like an artistic movement, I don't have much opinion on art history, so that's a wash. If you're thinking of Romanticism as a more intellectual period or movement, I have some thoughts on that. So Romanticism in an intellectual sense was a kind of a reaction to the Enlightenment, which, based on, on reason and evidence and whatnot. But then the French Revolution happened, which many saw as sort of, the logical recourse of the Enlightenment. I would say it's not, especially because the fact that the Enlightenment wasn't simply one thing, it was a bunch of different things in different places, and different Enlightenments had different elements. The French Enlightenment was quite destructive because it was done in the context of an absolutist monarchy in the Bourbon family. So you had a lot of these people with, a very corrupt monarchy, a very corrupt church, and so you had a very different kind of enlightenment, which for them was basically burn it all to the ground and start over. In contrast to, say, the American Enlightenment, which had, of course, been inspired by ancient Roman writers, Scottish philosophers, and a lot of religious work. Like the Bible was a big influence on the American Enlightenment, especially due to the Great Awakening happening at the same time. Romanticism, on the other hand, was kind of a reaction to it. It's like, after the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, you had Romanticism come about saying, okay, it's like, whoa, the Enlightenment went way too far in France. Clearly, there are some things about the world that can't be understood through evidence and reason. So clearly there's something more to this, stuff of the human soul that you cannot simply create a formula to control and understand. And within Romanticism, we've had multiple political ideologies emerge out of it that we're still dealing with today. Namely, socialism and nationalism are both products of Romanticism. And so I think Romanticism, at least in the context of which I've discussed it, has been quite important and I think overall detrimental to humanity. At least in the short run. Alright, and now we have two more questions from that rubber duck. Why do you believe in God and why are you a conservative? These are both actually kind of have the same answer, and that is, it's how I was raised. I wish I could say, oh yes, I read the works of Thomas Aquinas and became a believer in God, and then I read William F. Buckley Jr. and became a conservative, but that's not really the case. My conservatism came from a religious upbringing. I was raised in a house where we went to church every Sunday. My parents were in the choir. My grandfather on my dad's side was a pastor. Not a Lutheran pastor, no. My pastor grandfather is from Disciples of Christ. In fact, neither of my parents were raised Lutheran. They converted to Lutheranism in the late 80s, shortly before I was born. And the funny thing is that they chose to become Lutherans not due to the theology or anything, but for social reasons. One of my dad's closest friends was the church organist, and the church had a daycare, which my parents decided to send my older brother to, and then later me. But then, of course, like I said, we went to church every Sunday. I went to Sunday school. I did youth group. I went through confirmation, and in high school I did 4 years of acolyting. And in that traditional religious setting, we were taught traditionally conservative values, Don't have sex outside the confines of your heterosexual marriage, or don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat. Take personal responsibility for yourself. Growing up, both my parents had jobs and were working, and so I kind of grew up with that expectation. And that's how most people get both their political values and their religious values. You might be explicitly taught certain religious values, but political values are more things that sort of derive from that. Basically, I find most people don't choose their political ideology so much as they discover it. Like, as they grow up, they discover what their political ideology is by finding which political labels are affiliated with their values. And so they end up adopting that. And so as I got older, I discovered, oh, conservatism is associated with the values I grew up with, and conservatives are mostly associated with the Republican Party in modern politics, and so that's what I ended up naturally gravitating towards. And that's how it happens for most people. That doesn't mean you can't refine your understanding of these beliefs. I mean, as you get older and realize more of these things, you have the ability to refine it, It's like, sure, I didn't become a believer because of the arguments of Thomas Aquinas, but I found the arguments made by Thomas Aquinas for why it is not illogical to believe in a God to be the most convincing. Like, Anselm's arguments for God, complete nonsense in my opinion, but, Thomas Aquinas, it's like, especially his argument around sort of the problem of infinite regression, which is kind of just a derivative of sort of, the prime mover concept you got with, it was either Plato or Aristotle had the prime mover idea, I don't know. Hopefully future editing Grant will tell you guys which one is which on the screen. And then of course you learn more about the intricate nuances of conservatism or what policies are best for that stuff. And those are all the questions I got for it. I thank you guys for taking the time to ask the questions, and I'll see you later.